What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. As you can see, Christina is not introing this episode because we are starting off a really fun little mini series of short episodes where we're going to be doing some solo one off episodes here and there whenever we have something that we just really want to talk about. And so today, for episode number 42, this is something that's been on my mind and I've been preaching about it a lot lately, and it's just something that I really want to get out to you guys. And that is the principle and the premise of the fact that it's not all about the macros. And I know we talk about this a lot, and we get into this with a lot of our topics about intuitive eating, mindful eating, and a lot of circumstances that we run into with our clients. But today, I really want to focus on what's behind the macros that we are tracking. Because if you are new here and you don't know what a macro is, tracking your macros is essentially tracking the number of grams of carbs, fat, and protein that you eat on a daily basis. And when you explain it like that, it honestly kind of just sounds really outlandish and really weird to do that on a day to day basis. And it's not a natural thing. We have to try really hard to do that and to be good at that. And it is a skill that builds up over time that a lot of people have made into their lifestyle. And as a coach, this is a tool that I use with my clients. And a lot of my clients do track their macros. And basically, what that does for us is it allows me to make more concrete predictions and guarantees based on what the client is eating or not eating and how that progress should go based on math equations. And that's all great and fun when we're trying to get from point A to point B, whether it is building muscle or losing fat or changing your body composition in some way that is measurable that you really want to do in a specific amount of time. But here's the thing, guys, like me and Christina both, we don't coach people just to get from point A to point B. We coach people to basically make changes for the rest of their lives. And while macro tracking is a big part of that, and we do utilize macro tracking as a tool with our clients in order to be able to have them learn what a good nutritional background should look like. So, knowing how many carbs are in certain foods, how many fats, how much protein are in certain foods, knowing what a serving size looks like when you put something out on a plate, and being able to guesstimate and understand what your day-to-day intake should look like versus what maybe it was before you started tracking, and how to make those changes. I mean, if you've ever weighed out a true serving of cereal or a true serving of peanut butter, you know that it's very disappointing compared to what you normally would have poured out. Or if you look at some labels, it's really a trickery game where they say a serving size is half a cookie, so that's what's listed on the label. So you read it and you're like, oh, cool, this cookie is just this, and this. But in all actuality, it's twice the amount because the serving size tricked you, right? And so those are things that we learn with tracking macros. That is very, very important, because if you don't have that knowledge long term, you don't have that foundation laid, then you're not going to be able to go long term into really sustaining these habits. And so, what I want to talk about today is why it's not all about the macros. And oftentimes, when we are pursuing a goal and we are going towards a fat loss or muscle gain, it's really hard to not lose sight of this theme and what I'm going to talk about today. So, what kind of made me think of this topic for a podcast episode was actually a conversation with a client that I had a couple of months ago, I think, at this point, and it really made me laugh. She told me in a check-in one week that she went to a Mexican restaurant and she ordered chicken fajitas because she knew that chicken was high in protein, and she knew that it was just chicken and vegetables on a hot plate, and she could, monitor the toppings and the tortillas as she wanted. And that's a great option to order at a Mexican restaurant. So it comes out, right? And she eats it, and she eats all the chicken on the chicken fajita plate. But then when the time came for her to report to me on her check-in day, what she had eaten for that week, each day. She didn't log anything on her Excel sheet because she couldn't weigh the chicken. And so what I saw was like 40 grams of protein for the whole day from like other foods. And I didn't see probably the 50, 60 grams of protein that she probably got from her chicken added into that because she didn't log it. And so I asked her, what happened on this day where you had like 40 grams of protein? Why was it so low? And she said, well, I ate chicken fajitas at a Mexican restaurant, but I didn't log it because I couldn't weigh it. And I was like, and this is not, bad on her or anything at all. It's just like, that's when I realized what happens when we get too far into tracking and too so far away from the foundational habits that this tracking is supposed to teach us. Because she could have easily said, this looks roughly like 8 ounces of chicken. I could be wrong. I could be way off, but I'm just going to plug it in as that because that's the best guess that I could possibly have. And we're just going to go from there. And we probably would have ended up with a higher protein intake for the day. And I would have, looked at that and been like, okay, that day was A-okay. And so basically it was really interesting for me to see that like this kind of disconnect was happening that didn't make any sense of like, just because we couldn't put something on a food scale or just because we couldn't know exactly how to plug something into MyFitnessPal, that we weren't able to account for it at all. And it just doesn't make sense. And so it made me really start thinking about why we do this and why we need to focus on the foundation behind macros, what it's actually teaching us, and then taking that and applying that for the long term. So that's something that I've been working with my clients on for a long time now, and really just integrating it into how I coach clients, because ultimately it's cool to learn how to track macros and it is a very valuable tool. And here's the thing, some people can take that from point A to point B and then be like, okay, cool, I know what I've learned from this. I'm just going to keep these habits from tracking macros, but I'm not going to track anymore. But I don't see this happen with everyone. What I see happen with some people is they will track macros for a given period of time. And then when they stop tracking, they go from everything is regimented, everything is scheduled, planned, I have my meals, to now that I'm not tracking, I have no idea what to do with my nutrition. And that's not how it should be. So if you're someone who kind of is either tracking and on it or not tracking and completely off, I encourage you to really tune into this episode and listen, because what I want to encourage you to do is think beyond the numbers and think beyond tracking and the app and MyFitnessPal and whatever you use, right, in your food scale. And I want you to think, what are these things that we're doing that are so weird when you really think about it? Putting your food on a food scale, plugging in everything to the gram, searching up specific keywords so you know it can be accurate what you were putting in your body. It is truly a niche thing, and it is weird. And I admit it because I'm someone who still does track macros a good amount. And so I want to encourage you to really think about your habits that these macros are perpetuating. So instead of thinking, well, I'm only on track when I weigh my food and I plug things into a food app, sorry, not food scale. Instead, think, okay, I'm on track because I'm eating servings of lean proteins, fruits, vegetables. I'm managing my portion sizes, and I'm eating multiple times across the day, and I'm not letting myself get super hungry or super full in between meals because I have things planned out every few hours. And so those are the habits and the principles that we have from tracking macros. So remember that tracking your food, assigning numbers and values to things is only useful long term if we understand the application behind it and the principles that we're trying to get at. So those principles, again, managing portion sizes, lean protein sources, fruits, vegetables, eating plenty of those in your day-to-day diet, managing your serving sizes of starchy carbohydrates, and then the biggest thing, enjoying things like treats and alcohol in moderation, because that's what tracking macros teaches us, is that we can't eat, and this is the cliche, Pop-Tarts and protein shakes all day long. Like, well, you technically could, right? You could, literally fill your entire budget of carbs and fats with Pop-Tarts, peanut butter, and then just fill your protein with protein shakes. But no one does that because it just leaves you feeling absolutely miserable. And so understanding that in your normal day to day, having a healthy, balanced diet with mostly nutrient dense whole foods, and then here and there fitting in that cookie, here and there fitting in that drink that you really love to order when you go out to a specific bar or restaurant, ordering, or even in more extreme circumstances on the weekend when you know you're eating out 2 to 3 times per day and everything is on the go, figuring out a way to actually make that work in that specific circumstance without having to fall off track. And now that's really hard to do. And a lot of times I will accommodate clients with like a calorie goal and a protein minimum instead of doing macros for those types of days. But just understanding that you can be flexible and you can eat out and you can enjoy your favorite things in moderation, as long as for the most part you're making pretty good sound choices that center meals around lean protein, fruits, and vegetables. So those are the habits that we learn from tracking macros, and indirectly it's what tracking macros forces us to do for the most part. And there are people who take tracking macros to the opposite extreme, and they, maybe they eat once a day and they just have a giant feast once a day with all their macros. Or maybe I've seen that on YouTube, like years ago, that was a really big trend or something like that. But that's one thing. Or people take it to the extreme with the Pop-Tarts and protein shakes and all that, and try to, see how much junk they can fit into their diet rather than trying to just have a generally healthy diet and fitting in treats here and there. But that's what it teaches us, right? And so when we get too focused on the numbers and the other stuff, that's when we can really lose where the value is in this approach. And I like to encourage clients to actually just take a day off or a couple of days off in a row when there's, a weekend trip or a short vacation or even just like a date night. I challenge a lot of my clients who do track macros to take the night off from plugging things in and see if they can resist that temptation and just order the way that they probably would have ordered if they were still tracking. Because what happens is we get ourselves into this trap of thinking that if we're not tracking, if it doesn't go into MyFitnessPal, then it doesn't count. And that could not be more backwards, right? And so I encourage you, if you struggle with this and you're either always tracking and 100% on, or not tracking at all and way off your diet, I encourage you to challenge yourself to go through a day or even just one meal out, or even at home, and just make a meal or order a meal without plugging it in, without knowing what the macros are, but just order in the way that you would if you were tracking. And I know that I don't know, for some people it probably sounds like very simplified or kind of stupid to even like consider that this is a problem, but this is something that personally I've struggled with, that I know a lot of my clients do, and I know a lot of people do in general, with that kind of black and white, all or nothing thinking about just kind of whether or not you are on track or off track because you are tracking your food or not tracking your food. And if it's not in the app, then it doesn't count and I can eat whatever I want sort of mindset. And we want to get away from that. And how we do that is we have to practice. And so I encourage you, if you're listening to this is something you struggle with, go out to a restaurant, give it a shot, see how you do. And honestly, just giving yourself that intention for a night or a day can honestly make you feel so much more confident in the fact that you can stay quote unquote on track without tracking your macros. So I kind of got into this already, but I think it's important to talk about how tracking macros can be counterproductive towards our goals, and then kind of drawing back to the solution of like, how do we use this tool in a way that is useful long term? So kind of abusing the system in a way. A couple of the things that I mentioned are, having Pop-Tarts and protein shakes, filling your macros with, unhealthy, quote unquote, unhealthy things, or things that are more fun foods or sugary or however you want to categorize it, processed, or, drinking alcohol all day long and not filling your macros with actual food, and just using your calories for alcohol. Something I like to call macro hoarding, which is kind of along that one meal aspect, or like even just like if you're going out to dinner, or you just are scared that you might run out of food for the evening, kind of just not eating enough early in the day and then splurging on all of your food at night, which leads you to feeling bloated and disgusting and like you want to puke at the end of the day, because you have done that to yourself. So those are all ways that people kind of ignore their hunger cues, and they ignore the natural signals that their bodies are giving them, and they kind of, abuse the system in a way when it comes to tracking their food, and they're kind of going against the purpose that tracking our food was supposed to give us. And so again, those principles that we're trying to stick to. And so when it comes to all of those things, it's counterproductive because it teaches us to, like I said, ignore the way that we're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And something that I've really honed into lately is listening to my hunger and fullness cues, and listening to how like tuning into the scale. So this is a intuitive eating scale, and I'm going to pull it up. You won't be able to see it obviously because this is audio, but just so I can reference it while I'm talking to you guys. This is something that's used for intuitive eating, which is a mindful eating framework that a lot of registered dietitians use. But I've pulled this and I've used this with a ton of my clients, because if we're not getting back in tune with our hunger cues, which personally, I really, really struggle with this, because I have tracked macros for, a good portion of 7 years, probably straight. And currently it's something I'm still doing, but trying to find a nice balance between taking some time off from it and still staying regimented. And one thing that I've noticed is that I can totally ignore how hungry or full I am. And especially when I'm in kind of a maintenance phase, or like even growing phase, and I'm, eating a good amount of food, sometimes I'll be done eating with my dinner or whatever at the end of the night, totally satisfied, definitely full. And I'll just eat more because I have more macros left. And then I just wake up feeling bloated and full, and it's just unnecessary. And so something that I've been learning to do is just really tuning into myself and asking, where am I on this hunger fullness scale? So I've mentioned this in a couple previous podcasts, but this hunger fullness scale is essentially a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being starving and overly hungry. I like to categorize it as my stomach is eating itself type of thing. And 10 is painfully overfull, like worse than Thanksgiving, like you're about to puke, like it is the most full you've ever been and you feel disgusting. And so for weight maintenance, the main goal is to stay between a 4 and a 6 on the hunger fullness scale. So a 4 is about starting to feel hungry, but not quite super hungry yet. And a 6 is feeling full and satisfied, not needing more food, but not being bloated. And so kind of above that, a 7 is slightly over full, might be bloated. And below a 4 is definitely hungry, needs to eat. And then anything below that is kind of getting like, dizzy, lightheaded, that sort of stuff. And so what we're trying to do here with this scale, first of all, it serves as a check-in point with yourself, where you can look internally and ask yourself, how am I really doing on this today? And personally, checking in with myself on that, it's absolutely blows my mind how much I've ignored it in the past. Because even today, it's 8:22 p.m. right now, and I had lunch at about 2. Normally I would eat lunch at about like noon or even 1 p.m. But I checked in with myself at noon. I said, am I hungry right now? Stood up, walked around, drank some water, did not feel hungry whatsoever. 1 o'clock rolled around. I was like, I feel like I should be getting hungry at this point, and I wasn't. And so I kept working and I just sat at my chair. And then 2 p.m. rolls around. I get up and I'm like, oh, I feel physical hunger now. Okay, I guess I can eat now. And I wasn't even like really hungry. And the old me, before I started implementing this kind of stuff, would have probably eaten at noon and then just been overly full for the rest of the afternoon. So really just trying to tune back into this. And then especially when going out to eat, the hardest part, especially for me, is not getting too high on the scale when I'm going out to eat and enjoying a meal with friends or family or Aaron or someone, because ultimately, like, food is a love language, food is culture, food is social. And so it's really hard to tune in internally and listen to your own signal amongst all the noise of the social signals to eat, the plate in front of you that's still half full, the parents or the relatives that are urging you to try their home cooked recipes when you're not even hungry. And so a lot of times when we are thinking about implementing this scale and listening to ourselves and making choices based on that, it's not just a matter of whether you eat or you don't eat, but it's a matter of how much you eat and when you stop. And so something that I've been working on is kind of just slowing down when I'm eating in general. And this is not something that macro tracking teaches you, because it's more so about what you eat and how much of it that you eat. But the pace that you eat is actually so important. So I've been slowing down and trying to stop before I feel any sort of fullness, and then just kind of waiting to see if it comes around. And more often than not, I will overpass that point, and then I will feel a little bit too full, and I'll be at a 7 or an 8 on the scale instead of a 6 where I wanted to leave off. And again, still getting better at this, but this is something that I really encourage you guys, especially if you're like newer to eating a healthy diet, living a healthy lifestyle, and you don't have all these bad habits that have been, stocked up for years and years and years like I have. Start to just tune in with yourself. Like, you don't even have to. And here's the thing, I'm talking about macro tracking. I'm talking about how we get away from it, how we make those habits sustainable. If you're someone who's never tracked a macro in your life, if you don't even want to start, just start with this hunger and fullness scale. I literally have clients sometimes where I tell them to just start with this. Like, let's not even set a goal yet for number of calories or number of protein or anything. Let's just tune in, because if we can harness that skill, we are going to be able to navigate everything else so much better, because there is so much noise with food and the different pressures to eat versus not eat. And the pressures are external, the pressures are internal, the pressures are social, cultural, emotional, everything. And so if we can learn how to look inwards just at how our physiological hunger is, and better listen to that and make more educated decisions based on that, we're going to be a heck of a lot better off going into any sort of diet accountability strategy. So I encourage you to take a look. Just Google Hunger-Fullness scale. It's literally like a bunch of scales of 1 to 10 will come up on Google Images, and save it to your phone, and just try to zoom out and really think about that when you are in a situation where you're nervous about overeating, or you are kind of just having the same dilemma that I've been going through and talking about lately. So yeah, I mean, today I didn't want this episode to be too long. Again, we're doing kind of a mini series, a short series, but I encourage you guys to just spend time working on getting away from numbers if tracking macros is something that you have done for a long time, or if it's something that you struggle to get away from without going totally off track. And work on using those habits that it's supposed to teach you to build long-term confidence with how to eat right without a food scale or an app, because we don't want to be 80 years old and weighing out things to the gram. We don't want to be using MyFitnessPal, even though technology is not going anywhere. Do we really want to be using that into our old age? So really just focus on the habits behind the macros. Remember that the macros are only a thing because of what they can teach us. And it's not the end of the world if you take a meal off from tracking here and there. And it's actually probably really productive for you to practice doing. So I would also just, remember that tracking macros depends on context, and it is important to use number specific metrics and goals and targets when you have a specific goal to reach. And so it's always context dependent. I always say that. So know when and when not to be using macro tracking. And this is not an anti-macro episode. I've told you a lot of good things about what it can teach us and the skills that it builds for most people. But understanding that if your goal is not to get from point A to point B and lose X amount of fat or build X amount of muscle in this amount of time, and you just want to develop better habits, then know that it's probably not necessary. And if you focus more on making decisions that align with your hunger and fullness, as well as eating a higher protein diet and just generally eating more whole food based stuff, you'll probably make a lot of really great changes without even needing to touch a food scale. So yeah, I just want to encourage you guys with that. Don't let any social media guru or anyone online tell you that tracking macros is the only way and is the holy grail, even though we even talk about it a lot here on the Barbell Lifestyle podcast. So hopefully this has given you some insight into how you can step away from tracking either periodically or for the long term and take those habits from the skill that we learn when we start our fitness journeys and we get gung-ho into the food scales and the apps and the numbers, and how to step away from that in a healthy way that's going to perpetuate those habits that macro tracking teaches you for the rest of your life, because that's really the goal that we want, is to live a healthier lifestyle, add years to our life. And people die of bad habits, and we don't want to perpetuate that or keep going on that cycle. So if you can remember those things into your future, you'll be really well off. So yeah, just remember why you're using the tool, and remember that it's a tool in your tool belt and it's not the end all be all. And you can have a number of tools in your tool belt, including macros, including the Hunger-Fullness scale, including just general healthier habits and things I talked about, like slowing down when you're eating and not eating distracted, and all of those things that we like to mention as well. So yeah, hopefully you guys like this little short episode, and let us know other topics that you'd like either me or Christina to cover specifically on our own. And we could even throw in personal updates or anything like that in there too. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this quick little episode and that it brought you some value. If it did bring you some value, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast or leave a rating and review. It does help our show grow and allows us to reach more people and even bring on more influential guests that can bring more value and knowledge back to you. So, all right, I think that's going to be everything. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening to this, and we will catch you in the next one.